The vast emptiness of space held many secrets, but none so desperate as the Luminar fleet that drifted helplessly in the darkness. What had once been a magnificent armada of over 3,000 ships now floated powerless, their gleaming hulls reflecting the distant starlight as they slowly spun in the void. Admiral Trell stood on the command deck of the flagship, her four-fingered hands clasped tightly behind her back as she stared at the holographic display. Their situation was dire. The quantum anomaly they had encountered 3 cycles ago had damaged their faster-than-light drives beyond repair, and now even their conventional engines were failing. "Status report," she demanded, her voice calm despite the tension rippling through her slender frame. Officer Vex approached with clear reluctance. "Life support systems are stable for now, Admiral, but power reserves continue to drop across the fleet. The refugee ships are particularly vulnerable. We have perhaps 20 cycles before critical systems begin to fail." Trell's large, almond-shaped eyes narrowed. "And our distress signals?" "No response from any Luminar outposts. We drifted too far off course when the anomaly hit. There are no civilized worlds within range." "None of our kind," Trell corrected quietly. She turned to the star map and pointed to a small blue-green planet in a nearby system. "What about them?" The command crew fell silent. Everyone knew which planet she meant. They had been monitoring its broadcasts for decades. Primitive but fascinating communications that revealed a species both violent and compassionate, destructive yet creative. The humans. Vex couldn't hide his shock. "Admiral, they've barely achieved spaceflight. Their technology is rudimentary at best. And yet," Trell said, stepping closer to the holographic image of Earth, "they solve problems differently than we do. Their entire history is a story of overcoming limitations through sheer stubborn ingenuity." Science Officer Mel joined them, her voice low but firm. "Admiral, I must object. The Council expressly forbids contact with pre-FTL species, and humans are particularly unpredictable. Their broadcasts show they're still divided, still fighting among themselves." Trell turned away from the display. "And what would you suggest, Science Officer? That we let 3 million refugees die quietly in the darkness? That we abandon the last survivors of our home system because of protocol?" No one answered. They all knew the truth. There were no other options. "Prepare a message," Trell ordered. "Something they can understand with their current technology. Use their most common languages." For 3 days, the Luminar communication experts worked to craft a message that humans could both receive and comprehend. They simplified their advanced concepts and translated them into basic mathematical principles that would be universal. They included simple diagrams of their fleet and its location, along with clear indications of their distress. When the message was ready, Trell reviewed it one final time before giving the order to transmit. "Send it on all frequencies they monitor," and may the stars guide it to receptive minds. The signal traveled through the emptiness of space, racing toward the small blue planet at the speed of light. On Earth, it was just another ordinary Tuesday. People went about their lives, unaware that everything was about to change. At radio telescope installations around the globe, computers suddenly registered an anomalous signal. In China, Russia, America, and a dozen other countries, scientists were called from their beds to analyze the structured pulses coming from deep space. Within hours, the pattern became clear. This was no natural phenomenon. By morning, the news had reached government leaders. By evening, rumors were spreading online. And by midnight, the world knew. They were not alone. And somewhere out there, someone needed their help. Humanity's greatest adventure was about to begin. 58 days after the alien message reached Earth, the spacecraft Endeavour I hovered at the edge of the solar system. Inside, Captain Tom Ellis floated through the command module, his heart pounding against his ribs. The small crew watched their instruments with intense focus, each person aware they were making history. "Signal confirmed," said Dr. Lisa Reed, the communications specialist. "They're approaching our position." Ellis nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. When nations around the world had decoded the distress signal, the United Nations formed an emergency response team. Ellis, a veteran astronaut with 3 Mars missions under his belt, had been selected to lead the team of 12 specialists, engineers, linguists, medical officers, and military personnel from 8 different countries. "Everyone remember your training," Ellis said, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. "We represent all of humanity now." Engineer Jack Wilson adjusted the camera feeds. "I still can't believe we're doing this. First contact. Real aliens. Let's hope they're as friendly as they sound," muttered Security Officer Martinez, checking her harness for the 5th time. Dr. Anna Petrov, the chief linguist, smiled nervously. Their message was clear. They need help, not invasion or conquest. "That's a good sign." A soft alarm chimed throughout the module. On the main view screen, a dark shape appeared against the star field, growing larger by the second. Unlike the sleek metal ships of human science fiction, the alien vessel resembled a massive translucent shell with glowing points of light pulsing along its surface. "My God," whispered Medical Officer Dr. Thompson. "It's beautiful." "They're transmitting again," Reed announced. "Same frequency as before." The alien vessel stopped about a kilometer away, too close for comfort, but far enough to show restraint. A smaller craft detached from the main ship and moved slowly toward them. "They're requesting docking permission," Reed said, her fingers flying over the interface. "Using our own protocols. They've studied us well." Ellis took a deep breath. "Grant permission. Open the airlock." The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence as the alien shuttle connected with their ship. Elaborate filtering systems engaged on both sides, ensuring no cross-contamination. Finally, the inner airlock door slid open. The first alien to enter the Endeavour was smaller than expected, about the height of a 10-year-old child, but with proportions that reminded Ellis of an elegant crane. Its skin was pale blue with subtle patterns that seemed to shift under the lights. Large, almond-shaped eyes dominated a face with minimal features. It wore what appeared to be a translucent suit that shimmered with embedded technology. "I am Vex," the alien said in perfect English, its voice produced by a small device at its throat. "Lead diplomat of the Luminar fleet. We thank you for answering our call." Ellis stepped forward. "Captain Thomas Ellis, representing Earth. We're here to help however we can." Vex's large eyes blinked slowly. "Your journey here was dangerous. You risked much to meet unknown beings." "That's what humans do," Jack said from behind Ellis. "We explore. We help." 2 more Luminar entered the module, each carrying strange devices that pulsed with soft light. One began scanning the walls while the other approached Dr. Petrov. "Your language skills are impressive," the alien said to her. "We observed your broadcasts for many cycles." Petrov nodded. "We've been studying your message since it arrived. Your mathematics helped us build translation models." Vex turned back to Ellis. "Captain, our situation is worse than when we sent our message. Our fleet carries the last 3 million survivors of our system. Our home star became unstable, forcing evacuation. Now we drift, power failing, with nowhere to go." "Why contact us?" Martins asked bluntly. "Surely there are more advanced civilizations out there." Vex's expression changed subtly. "There are. But they think like us, logically, linearly. Our engineers cannot solve our problem because they cannot think beyond their training." "And you think we can?" Ellis asked. "Your species' history is filled with impossible solutions to hopeless problems," Vex replied. "You create when logic fails. You imagine what does not exist. This is why we called for humans." The alien's voice modulator couldn't convey emotion, but its next words hung in the air with unmistakable weight. "You are our last hope." The Luminar shuttle cut through the darkness of space like a ghost, its translucent hull barely visible except for the pulsing blue lights that marked its contours. Inside, Captain Ellis and his team sat in specially designed chairs that adjusted to human anatomy. a thoughtful accommodation from their alien hosts. "We're approaching light speed," Vex announced, his slender fingers dancing across controls that seemed to respond to touch and thought simultaneously. "The journey to our fleet will take 17 of your Earth days." Jack Wilson, the chief engineer, couldn't stop staring at the propulsion systems. "This technology is at least a century beyond ours," he whispered to Maria Rice, his deputy. "Maybe 2 centuries." "And yet they still need our help," Maria replied, her dark eyes studying the alien technology with intense focus. "That's what doesn't make sense to me." The human team had voted unanimously to visit the stranded fleet. The UN Security Council had given reluctant approval, aware that this could be humanity's greatest opportunity for advancement, or its greatest risk. Each team member had recorded messages for their families, knowing they might never return. As days passed in the confines of the shuttle, humans and Luminar began a cautious cultural exchange. Dr. Petrov led most discussions, discovering that despite their advanced technology, the Luminar society was rigid and hierarchical. "Your entertainment broadcasts confused us greatly," Vex admitted during one conversation. "Your species seems to value those who break rules and defy authority." Ellis laughed. "We call them heroes sometimes. Other times, troublemakers. In Luminar society, everyone has their place," Vex explained. "To question is to create inefficiency. But to question is how we learn," Maria countered. "How we innovate." Vex's large eyes blinked slowly. "Perhaps this is why we need you." On the 12th day, Dr. Thompson conducted careful medical scans of their hosts with permission. "Their cellular structure is fascinating," he reported later to Ellis in private. "They're carbon-based like us, but their neural pathways are completely different. They process information sequentially, perfectly, but without deviation." "You're saying they think in straight lines," Ellis said. "Exactly. No lateral thinking. No creative leaps." When the shuttle finally emerged from its faster-than-light travel, the human team pressed against the viewports, struck speechless. Before them stretched the Luminar fleet, thousands of massive vessels arranged in perfect geometric formations. Some were clearly city ships, with transparent sections revealing entire ecosystems within. Others appeared to be manufacturing centers or agricultural units. All were connected by faint energy tethers, and all were drifting, their engines dark. 3 million souls, Vex said quietly. "The remainder of our civilization." The shuttle approached the flagship, a vessel so enormous that Ellis compared it to Manhattan Island floating in space. As they docked, Vex turned to the humans. "I must warn you. The High Council is divided on bringing outsiders. Some believe it shows weakness. We understand pride," Ellis assured him. "We have plenty of it ourselves." The docking bay was filled with Luminar officials when they arrived. Unlike Vex and his diplomatic team, these aliens made no effort to hide their skepticism. Admiral Trell stood at the front, her tall frame imposing despite her slender build. "Captain Ellis," she said, her translator making her voice sound deeper than Vex's. "I am responsible for this unusual solution. Not all agree with my decision." Ellis stepped forward. "We're honored to help, Admiral. We've brought our best people." "Your best," said another Luminar, stepping forward with obvious disdain. "From a species that still burns fossil fuels on their home planet." Jack Wilson bristled, but kept silent. Maria placed a warning hand on his arm. Admiral Trell silenced the critic with a gesture. "Counselor Nex, these humans traveled far to assist us. They deserve respect." "They deserve nothing until they prove their worth," Nex replied coldly. "And they have much to prove." As the humans were escorted deeper into the flagship, Ellis leaned closer to Vex. "Just how bad is the situation really?" Vex's voice dropped. "Worse than we told you. Without functional drives, life support systems on the refugee ships will fail within 30 days. We are not just stranded, Captain Ellis." He looked back at the endless corridor of silent aliens watching them pass. "We are dying." The Luminar Engineering Center sprawled across 3 decks of the flagship, filled with technology that made Earth's most advanced laboratories look like children's toys. Jack Wilson and Maria Reyes stood surrounded by holographic displays showing the damaged FTL drive systems, while Luminar engineers watched with thinly veiled skepticism. So the quantum anomaly created a cascading failure in your propulsion matrix, Jack said, studying the intricate schematics. And conventional repairs failed because Chief Engineer Krell, a Luminar with faint green markings on his blue skin, gestured at a complicated section of the display. The quantum particles are permanently out of phase. Our attempts to realign them only worsened the damage. Maria walked slowly around the hologram, her brow furrowed in concentration. You're working from the assumption that the particles need to be realigned to their original state. Of course, Krell replied, his translator conveying his confusion. That is the only logical approach. Jack and Maria exchanged glances. It had been 3 days since their arrival, and they were beginning to understand the Luminar problem. Their hosts weren't just advanced. They were almost too advanced, too specialized in their thinking. On Earth, Jack explained, we often solve problems by working around them rather than trying to fix them directly. Krell's large eyes blinked rapidly. Inefficient, but effective, Maria countered. She pointed to a different section of the drive. What if we bypassed the quantum matrix entirely? Use a controlled fusion reaction to jumpstart the secondary systems. A murmur ran through the Luminar engineers. Admiral Trell, who had been observing silently from the doorway, stepped forward. That would require dismantling safety protocols built into our ships for generations, she said. It would be dangerous. More dangerous than 3 million people dying in space, Jack asked bluntly. Captain Ellis entered the room with Vex, having spent the morning touring the refugee ships. His face was grim. The situation on the outer vessels is deteriorating faster than they admitted, he said quietly to his team. Some are already rotating life support to conserve power. Admiral Trell's posture stiffened. We did not wish to cause panic. With respect, Admiral, Ellis replied. My team needs all the facts if we're going to help. The tension in the room was broken by Maria, who suddenly snapped her fingers, a human gesture that startled the Luminar. Jack, what if the quantum anomaly didn't damage the drives? What if it changed the fundamental rules they operate under? Jack's eyes widened, like shifting from one set of physics to another. Exactly. The drives aren't broken. They're just operating in a different reality framework. The Luminar engineers stared in confusion, but Admiral Trell leaned forward, suddenly interested. Explain, she commanded. Jack turned to the holographic controls, struggling briefly with the unfamiliar interface before Krell assisted him. Together, they modified the display to show a simplified model. Your quantum drives work by manipulating the fabric of spacetime, using these particle accelerators, Jack said. But what if the anomaly altered the way spacetime responds to the manipulation? That would mean, began Krell, that you're using the right tools for the wrong universe, Maria finished. We need to recalibrate the entire system to match the new quantum state. Counselor Nex, who had been silently observing, stepped forward with obvious skepticism. This is absurd. You propose to rewrite drive physics that took our civilization centuries to perfect. Sometimes fresh eyes see what experts miss, Ellis said diplomatically. Admiral Trell studied the humans thoughtfully. How would you proceed? We need to build a test model, Jack said. Something small-scale that won't endanger the fleet if it fails. That would require significant resources, Krell observed. Less than would be needed for 3 million funeral pods, Maria replied sharply. The room fell silent. Finally, Admiral Trell nodded. You have 5 days to demonstrate a working prototype, she said. After that, we must pursue other options. As the Luminar filed out of the room, Jack turned to Maria. 5 days to reinvent alien FTL technology. No pressure. Ellis placed a hand on both their shoulders. If anyone can do it, it's you two. And if we can't? Maria asked quietly. Ellis looked through the viewport at the vast fleet stretched out before them, millions of lives hanging in the balance. Then humanity's first contact with alien life might also be our last. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the command deck as Admiral Trell received the latest reports. The power failures had accelerated beyond all projections. 3 refugee ships in the outer ring had already lost main life support, forcing evacuation to already crowded vessels nearby. Status of the human project, Trell demanded, her normally calm voice tight with stress. Krill's slender fingers moved across his station. The test is being prepared now, but Counselor Nex has gathered supporters. They're demanding we abandon this approach and focus on conventional repairs. Captain Ellis stood silently beside Trell, having earned the right to attend these briefings. The past 4 days had been a blur of activity as Jack and Maria worked with a small team of open-minded Luminar engineers. Their prototype was crude but promising, a hybrid system that looked like alien technology crossed with something from Earth's Industrial Revolution. Admiral, a communications officer called out, "We've lost contact with the agricultural vessel Luma 7. Trell's large eyes narrowed. That's not possible. They reported stable power reserves yesterday. The main view screen shifted to show a distant ship where lights were systematically going dark section by section. Sabotage, Ellis said quietly. Trell turned to him. What? This isn't a random failure. Someone's deliberately shutting down systems. Ellis had seen enough crises to recognize the pattern. You have an internal problem. Admiral. Before Trell could respond, the doors to the command deck slid open. Counselor Nex entered, flanked by a dozen Luminar security officers. Admiral Trell, Nex announced formally. The Emergency Council has voted. Your command is suspended pending review. The command crew froze, looking between Trell and Nex in shock. Such a direct challenge to authority was almost unheard of in Luminar society. On what grounds? Trell demanded. Endangering the fleet by diverting critical resources to an untested human theory. Nex replied coldly. We have received the refugee reports. Time is running out. We must focus all efforts on conventional repairs. Ellis stepped forward. Counselor, conventional approaches have failed repeatedly. Our solution. Your solution, Nex interrupted, is primitive guesswork. We know your history, Captain Ellis. Your kind nearly destroyed your own planet multiple times. You wage wars over resources and ideology. You are chaos embodied. Sometimes chaos is exactly what's needed, came a new voice. Maria Rice stood in the doorway, her uniform stained with coolant fluid and her hair tied back messily. The test worked. A murmur ran through the command deck. Nex turned, his posture rigid with disbelief. Impossible. The calculations were based on the wrong assumptions, Maria said, moving to the central console. May I, Admiral? Trell nodded, and Maria transferred data from her tablet to the main system. The view screen filled with test results and sensor readings. We achieved 42% efficiency on the first test, she explained. Jack is making adjustments now for the second run. With these results, we believe we can restore enough power to restart the main drives. How? Krell asked, studying the data with obvious amazement. This contradicts fundamental drive theory. Because we stopped trying to fix your technology and started adapting it, Maria explained. The quantum anomaly didn't damage your drives. It changed the underlying physical laws they operate on. Your drives were trying to manipulate space-time that doesn't behave the same way anymore. Nex stepped closer to the display. Even if this is true, implementing this solution fleet-wide would take months we don't have. Not if we do it ship by ship, starting with the most critical, Ellis suggested. A small team on each vessel. That would require physically installing modified equipment on hundreds of ships. Trell noted. The radiation levels in the drive sections are manageable with proper shielding, Maria finished. We've designed portable units, but we need to start now. Nex's security team shifted uncomfortably, unsure who to follow as the command structure fractured. Suddenly, the deck shuddered beneath them. Warning alarms blared from multiple stations. Direct hit on Engineering Section 3. A tactical officer reported. Internal weapons fire detected. Trell's expression hardened. It seems some have chosen a more direct approach to stopping the human solution. Ellis met her gaze. We need to secure the prototype and get teams to the critical ships immediately. Against armed opposition, Trell added grimly. Maria looked between them. Every minute we delay, more systems fail. Trell straightened to her full height. Captain Ellis, I am officially requesting Earth's assistance in a combat situation. Will you help us fight our own people? Ellis didn't hesitate. That's what we came for, to save everyone, even from themselves. The corridors of the Luminar flagship echoed with the wail of emergency sirens. Jack Wilson crouched behind a barricade of overturned equipment, the prototype drive component clutched against his chest. Across the room, 3 Luminar loyal to Admiral Trell exchanged fire with Nex's security forces. This wasn't in the mission briefing, Jack muttered to himself as energy pulses crackled overhead. His communicator buzzed. Jack, status report. Maria's voice came through, punctuated by static. Still pinned down in Lab 4, he replied. The prototype is intact, but I can't reach the shuttle bay. Hold position, Maria ordered. Martinez is leading a team to clear a path to you. Across the fleet, chaos was spreading. The power failures had accelerated, and with them, panic among the refugees. Nex had convinced many that the humans were saboteurs sent to finish what the quantum anomaly had started. Others rallied behind Trell, believing the humans represented their last hope. On the command deck, Captain Ellis helped Trell coordinate their dwindling resources. A holographic display showed red warning indicators spreading across the fleet map like a disease. Life support failing on vessels 7 through 13, reported Krell. Cryostasis chambers on the medical ships are switching to emergency power. If they fail, we lose 10,000 critically ill patients. Ellis studied the tactical situation. We need to split up. I'll take a team to secure the main engineering hub. We can't install the prototype if Nex controls that area. And I will confront Nex directly, Trell decided. Many still respect the chain of command. If they see us fighting among ourselves while the fleet dies, some may return to reason. Ellis grabbed her arm. That's too dangerous. Nex wants you eliminated. Trell's large eyes met his. When you answered our call, you risked everything for strangers. Can I do less for my own people? Before Ellis could respond, Maria's voice came through the communication system. Captain, we've assembled installation teams. We have enough modified components for 20 ships. We're prioritizing medical and high-population vessels. Proceed immediately, Ellis ordered. But stay alert. Hostile forces are targeting anyone working with humans. Across the fleet, small teams of humans and loyal Luminar began their desperate mission. Each installation required manually recalibrating the quantum drives while under emergency conditions, and sometimes under fire. In Engineering Section 5, Maria led a team of 4 through the cramped maintenance tunnels of a refugee ship. The air was growing thin as life support failed, and temperature was dropping rapidly. How much farther? Asked Dr. Thompson, who had volunteered despite being a medical officer, not an engineer. Drive housing is just ahead, Maria replied, checking her tablet. Radiation levels are rising. Suits will only provide protection for 15 minutes. They reached the central chamber to find the drive housing pulsing with an eerie blue light. The quantum particles, knocked out of phase by the anomaly, created a deadly radiation field around the equipment. Starting installation, Maria announced, her voice steady despite her fear. Thompson, monitor our exposure levels. If anyone hits critical, they evacuate immediately. Back on the flagship, Ellis and a small security team fought their way toward the main engineering hub. The Luminar weapons fired pulses of concentrated energy, not immediately fatal to humans, but capable of causing severe nerve damage. Two of his team were already down, their limbs spasming uncontrollably. "Hub entrance is just ahead," called Martinez, taking cover beside a junction. Heavy resistance. Ellis checked his makeshift weapon, a luminar energy projector modified by Jack to work with human reflexes. "On my signal, covering fire. We need tow." A massive explosion rocked the corridor. When the smoke cleared, Ellis saw Admiral Trell standing in the newly created opening, her slender form silhouetted against the fires behind her. "The engineering hub is secured," she announced. "Nex is contained, but we've lost primary control systems." Ellis helped her through the debris. "Are you injured?" "Not critically," she replied, though blue fluid seeped from a wound in her side. "The drive controls. Jack is bringing the prototype. Maria's teams are installing components fleet-wide." Trell's communicator chimed with an emergency code. "Admiral," came Krell's urgent voice, "cryostasis systems are failing on Medical Ship 3. 2,000 patients have less than 10 minutes of life support." Ellis locked eyes with Trell. "Maria's team is closest, but they're already at maximum radiation exposure," Trell replied gravely. Ellis activated his communicator. "Maria, emergency redirect to Medical Ship 3. Cryostasis failure." There was a moment of static before Maria's voice came through, sounding strained. "Already at critical exposure, Captain. But we'll get it done." As Ellis moved to respond, Jack finally arrived with the prototype, his face grim. "Captain, the main drive is ready for the modified component, but someone needs to make the final adjustments manually. The radiation in there will kill anyone in minutes." Ellis looked at the wounded admiral, then at the fleet display showing thousands of failing life support systems. "I'll do it," he said quietly. The medical bay of the Luminar flagship hummed with quiet activity as Captain Ellis slowly opened his eyes. The ceiling above him pulsed with soft blue light, a gentle rhythm that somehow eased the burning pain throughout his body. "He's awake," came a familiar voice. Dr. Thompson moved into Ellis's field of vision, looking exhausted but smiling. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Captain. You had us worried." Ellis tried to speak, but his throat felt raw. A Luminar medical officer appeared, pressing a small device to his neck that immediately soothed the pain. "The fleet?" Ellis managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "Saved," Thompson replied simply. "The drive modifications worked. Power has been restored to all vessels. Life support systems are stable." Memory flooded back to Ellis. The desperate race to install the modified drive component in the main engineering section. The blinding light as radiation alarms screamed around him. The burning sensation as he made the final connections before darkness took him. "How?" Ellis gestured weakly at himself. "The radiation. The Luminar have impressive medical technology," Thompson explained. "And Admiral Trell pulled you out herself after you collapsed. She absorbed a dangerous dose, saving you." As if summoned by her name, Admiral Trell entered the medical bay. Her movements were slower than before, and faint scars marked her blue skin where radiation burns had been treated. "Captain Ellis," she said formally, but with a warmth that her translator somehow conveyed. "Once again, you and your team have done the impossible." Ellis tried to sit up, and Thompson helped adjust his bed. "Maria, Jack, the others." "Engineer Rice suffered severe radiation exposure on the medical ship, but will recover," Trell reported. "Engineer Wilson successfully coordinated the fleet-wide implementation after you secured the main hub. All your team survived, though many will require extended treatment." "And Nex?" Trell's expression hardened slightly. "Counselor Nex and his most radical supporters have been confined. The Emergency Council has been dissolved. Your actions have changed much about Luminar society." "For better or worse?" Ellis asked. "Both, perhaps," Trell admitted. "We have been a rigid people for too long. Your human adaptability showed us another way. It saved us when our own traditions would have doomed us." The door to the medical bay slid open, and Jack Wilson entered, followed by a group of Luminar officials Ellis didn't recognize. Jack's face broke into a wide grin when he saw Ellis awake. "The hero of the hour," Jack declared. "How are you feeling, Captain?" "Like I flew too close to the sun," Ellis replied with a weak smile. "The fleet is really safe." Jack nodded. "The hybrid drive system is working better than we hoped. The Luminar engineers are already making improvements based on our design. They're calling it the human adaptation." One of the Luminar officials stepped forward, wearing the elaborate garments that Ellis had learned indicated high governmental rank. "Captain Ellis, I am First Minister Kell of the Luminar High Council," the alien announced. "I have come to formally extend our gratitude and to present our offer." Ellis looked questioningly at Trell, who nodded encouragingly. "What offer?" Ellis asked. "In recognition of humanity's service to our people, we wish to establish a permanent alliance," Minister Kell explained. "We offer to share our technology, our knowledge, and our resources. Your species saved ours when no one else would even answer our call. Such courage and innovation deserves reward." Jack could barely contain his excitement. "Captain, they're talking about FTL drives for Earth, advanced medicine, clean energy, technologies that would advance humanity by centuries." Ellis looked around the room at the faces of his team and their Luminar allies. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission had become something far more profound, the beginning of a new chapter for both species. "There's something you should see, Captain," Trell said gently. She gestured, and the wall of the medical bay became transparent, revealing the vast starfield beyond. In the distance, a small blue dot was visible, growing larger as the fleet moved steadily toward it. "Earth," Ellis whispered. "Your home," Trell confirmed. "We thought it appropriate that you should all return as heroes of both our worlds." As Ellis watched the distant planet growing closer, he thought about the message that had started everything. A simple call for help from the darkness. Humanity had answered, not with fear or suspicion, but with courage and ingenuity. And in doing so, they had not only saved a stranded alien fleet, but had changed the course of human history forever. The stars no longer represented an unreachable frontier. They were now a road home and beyond.